Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, the creator and host of the award-winning podcast that you're listening to right now. Thank you so much, called Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. It is a daily podcast, 365 days a year, and each day we talk to an author about all of the things related to their career, their book, their life, and more in 30 minutes or less, because who has time? I am now an author myself, although I wasn't when I started this podcast, and you can get my new memoir, Bookends, a memoir of love, loss, and literature, wherever books are sold starting July 1st, and my children's book, Princess Charming. You can learn more about me at zibbyowens.com, but really you're here to learn more about the authors, and that is what we're going to do. Also, be sure to check out all the other podcasts in the Zcast Podcast Network. You can learn more at zcastnetwork.com and definitely check out those shows as well. Sheila Heti and Esmé Shapiro are co-authors of A Garden of Creatures. Sheila Heti is the author of 10 books, including the novels Pure Color, Motherhood, and How Should a Person Be? She was named one of the new vanguard by the New York Times, a list of 15 writers from around the world who are shaping the way we read and write fiction in the 21st century. Her books have been translated into 25 languages. Esmé Shapiro is an author and illustrator. Her picture books include Myself, Yourself, Carol and the Pickle Toad, Alma and the Beast, and Uku, which was a finalist for the Governor General's Literary Award. Esmé also illustrated Yak and Dove by Kyo McClear and Eliza, the Story of Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton by Margaret McNamara. A Garden of Creatures is their first collaboration. Welcome, Sheila and Esmé, to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. We're going to be talking about your new picture book, A Garden of Creatures, and so much else that you both are working on.
Wonderful. Thanks for having us.
No, thank you.
Okay, try to explain the beauty and the message behind A Garden of Creatures, what the book is really about, and Esmé, how you decided on the particular palette and how it looks, sort of an aesthetic standpoint as the illustrator, and what your main goals, the two of you together, are in having this book be out in the world.
Esmé, why don't you start?
You want me to? Okay. All right. So a couple years ago, I guess maybe 2 or 3 years ago now, Sheila sent me the manuscript for A Garden of Creatures, and it couldn't have plopped on my lap in a more important time. I had been grieving my grandfather, and I was just blown away by the simplicity and the beauty of the manuscript. Basically, the book deals with death in such an elegant way. The idea that when someone dies, they become the whole world, they become the garden that we're living in, was something that really resonated with me. When I was with my grandfather, when he was dying, I had the sense that he became the whole room. And when Sheila and I were emailing back and forth, I know, Sheila, you also had a similar experience with the death of your father. So we had this kind of synchronistic experience of death. And I was immediately like, I'm going to do this. I'm absolutely going to illustrate this book. And I'm a big fan of Sheila's work, and it was an honor to work with her. Basically, we just jumped right in terms of the color palette and the characters. The big thing that I wanted to show with my illustrations was the idea of it going from the darkness of the night to the lightness of the day. So if you look at it, it starts in the darkness. It's the night. The stars are twinkling, the moon is up, but it starts with the death. And in the night, we slowly start to pull away some of the big thoughts that the bunny is having and the cat is having. And by the end of the book, it goes into the brightness of the day. And Sheila, I'll let you, I'll give it to you now.
Yeah, I wrote the story. I was working on my novel Pure Color at the time, which was also very much in the wake of my father dying. And I was going to his house to clean it out. You know, after somebody dies, there's so much to do. It's so weird. You think that it should be just a time of quietness and grieving, and instead you're dealing with all this bureaucracy and all these details, and it's so frustrating. You're pulled back into life and you want to disappear from life. There's something so structurally weird about it. But anyways, I remember waiting for the bus, and just the story came to me. I just typed it out on my phone, and then I thought, I wonder what this is. Could it be a children's book? And I sent it to Esmé, who I had never met before, but she'd done an illustration. I'd commissioned an illustration from her at one point. And yeah, she said, this is a book. I'd love to illustrate it. If she had said it's not a children's book, I don't want to illustrate it, it just would still be on my phone.
Wow. Well, good thing you commissioned that last drawing then. I guess, it all worked out. You already had her in your Rolodex, so to speak. The book is beautiful. It's sad. It's, you have to stop. I mean, it's inspiring, but you have to stop and really think about your own sort of views of death and loss for a moment, right? You can't read this book and not reflect. And one of the beautiful parts about it is that you remind the reader that very act of reflecting on death is something that we all have in common, and that we are in that way. Every creature is alike in that we have to analyze and wonder, and there's no real way of knowing. And of course, you end up on a very positive note that as you mentioned, that the people we love are around us always. And I love to believe that too. And I also think about these things sort of all the time. I think my husband thinks I'm like so morbid, but my mind always goes to these places. Last night, my son, who's 8, was talking about, the world, not being here in however many years if the earth would disappear. And so I was like, well, if the earth disappears, does that mean that like the heavens disappear? And what about all the people who we've lost who kind of circulate? Does that mean? Anyway, so all to say, I'm like down this spiral often. And so I relate very much to the messaging of your book, as so many people will. But do you view this book as something for children? Is this a way for kids to start exploring their own questions about it? Is it more like, what is your intention of having it out there? I know you didn't have an intention writing it. It was beautiful and it came to you, and I'm so glad it's out here and it's, it's almost like a poem too. But I don't know, are you viewing this as something you're excited to go to schools and talk about? Or is it more like, I don't know, just where are you with it in terms of the audience and reception? And that was sort of a long rambling thing. But
yeah, there's been such a positive response from parents who say that they want to talk to their kids about death, or their child is already talking about death. And I think I hadn't realized this, but there aren't a lot of books for children that are sort of frank and not religious, but beautiful. Like that there can be something, that the mystery of death and that the questions that it leaves you with, that's rich. And I think I've had people say that they were moved by it and like it, and it's a book for adults too. I don't know. I just think that we don't talk about death, and the fact that the book begins with the death, I think is sort of special. Like kids know once they realize that death is a thing, they want to talk about it and think about it, because it's so. You would never think that death exists until you're told about it. It's counterintuitive that the people that we love go away. Even when we're adults, it's counterintuitive that somebody disappears.
Mm-hmm. Sheila, you've written a lot inspired by this loss of your dad. Can you talk about, would you mind telling me more about like what he was like and what the loss of him, how he passed away, and like what the effect of that has been on you?
Yeah, he was like a wonderfully optimistic and playful person, very loving and just a great father. But I think he was a happy person who loved life. And, I feel like his legacy for me spiritually in dying was like that. I don't know, his death sort of showed me even more beauty in life. I expected grieving to be sadness. And for me, it wasn't exactly sadness. It was deep and it was rich and it was disorienting and bewildering, but it opened up the world to me in kind of a magical way, which is not what I would have expected from the death of somebody that I loved. And Esmé, your grandfather died at the same time. And I think you had a similar. Did you?
Yeah.
What was he like?
My grandfather, who we called our papa, was an incredible man. He was He was like a giant man. He always wore like a little hat. And he was, he was the person that my whole family flocked to. He was the mountain we lived on. He had 5 kids, and my bubby had passed away when the kids were really young, and so he made it his life's work to hold the rest of the family together. There's 12 grandchildren. We're all incredibly close, and when he was passing away, it was actually the most beautiful passing a person could want. We were all there playing his favorite songs on the guitar. He loved Cat Stevens and Leonard Cohen. And, it almost felt like a ship, like we were all with him for the journey. And, when we go, that was a great way to go, because he was surrounded by so many of us that loved him. And eventually, when he did pass, I agree with Sheila, like it was so hard, but I also felt like we absorbed the parts of him that we always admired. And I carry him with me in a very special way now.
Yeah, I like how in the book you also refer to how you don't know when you're going to die because you're not you anymore, right? And so you can't feel that loss necessarily. I don't know, all this sort of like self-reflection has to stop, and how the bunny is just like, wow, they're just sort of flummoxed by this whole thing, but like sort of quietly accepting of it, which is this beautiful resolution. It's just really beautiful. And so important with so much loss in the world, especially the last few years, but obviously all the time. And nice to not hide it. I think what you said before, that, I have 4 kids and we lost people, we lost my husband's mom and grandmother died of COVID or from complications of COVID. And we had to go through all the stuff. We had all their boxes in our basement, and going through the boxes and what does it mean, and being able to talk about it is so important, right? Because the beauty you found, Sheila, I feel like you can find at any age. Once you've lost someone who is in your orbit, suddenly it does change the colors of the world. And I love how that's represented in the shifting of the colors, as you pointed out, Esmé. That's really awesome. Backstory for both of you. So Esmé, you start, and how did you become an illustrator to begin with?
I've always known I wanted to be in the arts. My mother is an artist. My father's a filmmaker. It was the water I was swimming in my whole life. And in high school, I basically was like, oh, I know exactly what I'm going to do, and I'm just going to be really focused, and I'm going to do it. I went to an arts high school, so I studied fine art for 4 years there, and then I studied fine art at RISD again for another 4 years. And, I love what I do. I feel like every single book I get to jump into a different world. And, I get to play with color and shapes and emotion. And I feel like I become a part of these kids' worlds in a very special way, part of the fabric of their identity. When we look back at kids' books as adults, I'm sure you guys have felt this way too, where it's just, you're taken back to where you were at the time when you were reading it. And it's a very special portal to that. So, these books that we're working on, especially kids' books, they become a part of who you are. And I feel very proud to be making images and symbols for people to grow up with.
It's amazing. And Sheila, I've done sort of a deep dive into you and your beginnings as a playwright, and sending stories out to random people on subways when you just wanted them to be read and all of that. Talk about your trajectory to being and working with words in so many ways: playwright, children's book, essay, fiction, novel. I mean, everything. Wait, when is the movie? I mean, the only thing I feel like you haven't done is write a screenplay, but maybe you have. So
no, I mean, it's sort of this. It's funny, as I haven't heard about Esmé's trajectory, and I feel like mine is very much the same. I was a creative kid that sort of did all kinds of art. I directed plays when I was like 5, and just loved making things always. And I would stay home from school and pretend to be sick and just make up worlds and make my own school and draw the girls that would go to the school and so on. And it was the best days of my life as a kid, staying home, pretending to be sick and just being able to make my art all day. And now that's like every day. It's just like the best result of what I could have ever hoped for. And I think, I wanted to be an actress. I wanted to be a photographer. There were so many things I wanted to do. And then I think I was in my teens when I just realized, you have to just pick one, because otherwise you're not going to get good at it, really great at any of them. And I wanted to be really great at something. And I sort of felt like, it's not, for a while I thought, well, there's going to be a loss not being able to do all these other artistic pursuits. And then I realized, no, if you pick one, all of the others will transform and come out in it. So even though I, gave up acting, I feel like there's still an element in which I do become an actress when I write books. You become the character, or you give up photography, but but there's this still like creation of images and the way things look when you're writing. So it's true, I didn't lose any of them. It's just they all express themselves in language. And I just think I chose writing because that was the one that when I did it, people gave me the most positive feedback. So you sort of listen to the world, like, oh, people like my stories. And I think I just also I felt the biggest when I was writing. Like all parts of myself came into being when I was writing. And that wasn't the case when I was acting or taking pictures or whatever the other things were. So, yeah.
I feel like so many of your books are these unique takes on books, like novels about novels, like people's story. It's like you're always questioning the form in which you're writing at the same time. So tell me about that.
Yeah, I think my subject ultimately is art.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm most interested in what is art, and how can you make something that's truly expressive of your soul. And everyone looks different inside from everybody else, a little bit different,
Mm-hmm.
also a little bit the same. And how can you find a shape? I feel like a lot of art is like an imitation of art that you've already taken in. How can you make something new? And I think the way you make something new is by making art truly play. And so when I'm working, I really just feel like I'm playing, and I think it's really never felt like work somehow. I think if you're imitating other novels consciously or unconsciously, then it would feel like work because you're doing something that isn't intuitive. So, I mean, it's a lot of labor, but it's not a lot of, I'm not ever trying to force an impulse into a form that's not my own.
Interesting. Wow. How do you feel about that, Esmé? And did you follow Sheila's work for a long time before you worked together?
I mean, I definitely agree that if you're making art, you should be in this intuitive kind of playful space. It's really funny. Like I'll do like an artist talk, and one of the questions I always get is, how did you develop your style? And I'm always like, I always say the same thing, which is that, don't consciously think about style. You just follow your nose, you follow your curiosity. And if you follow what you're interested in, there's always going to be a through line through all of your work. And there's always going to be certain motifs that you're drawn to. And if you're authentic to yourself, your style appears like, the Wizard of Oz. Your style's just there. It's in you. And yes, I definitely knew of Sheila's work. And we had run into each other in Toronto a few years prior at a restaurant. Like, there were lots of things with Sheila and I that just felt faded. Like we're just in each other's orbits. And I remember the first day that we met in Toronto at a cafe, and it was the kind of thing where we only had an hour, but we could have stayed and spoken to each other for like half a full day, 3 days a week. It's just like, I feel like Sheila and I, in many ways, are kindred spirits. I feel so connected to her work. And it's just such an honor to be able to bring A Garden of Creatures to life. Honestly, it was something that when I was working on it felt intuitive and playful, and like the creatures were already there. I was just putting a flashlight on them and bringing them to life.
Wow. Will there be more with the characters in this book? Do you see there being future books or just future books collaborations together, or have you already worked on something?
Well, we've never talked about it, but I mean, I think that would be so marvelous to do more together. And I agree with what Esmé says, like the books that you read as a child, you absorb on a cellular level, like in such a deep way, and it forms your being in permanently. And I think writing for children is one of the most beautiful kinds of writing that you can do. So yeah, good idea, Zibby. Let's do it, Esmé.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Amazing.
Anytime, Sheila.
I love it. No, I would like to see these characters live on. I mean, what would they do next? You know, like where would they go? What would they tackle? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Just
or new characters or anything.
Or new characters or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you have, which books affected you on a cellular level as a child?
You want to go first?
I'll just mention one. We were talking about it yesterday, Esmé, like Poppy Pig by Dick Bruna. And it's just a story of like a little pig in her house, and she just sweeps up and does the dishes and pulls the carrots out of the garden and then eats the carrots. And it's like a perfect day. And I think I always wanted that simple life where you just do a few simple tasks in the day and then you're like rewarded with your carrots. And I just still think, to me, like Poppy Pig's life is my ideal life. There's something about that book that I just, really resonated with me. A woman alone in her house. Not that I'm a woman alone in my house, but close.
I love that. For me, I was obsessed with Goodnight Moon. And looking back, I'm like, those images are so striking. Colors I personally would never even think to put together, like reds and greens and a primary yellow. Like when you look at them, there's nothing calming about the colors for a good night book, but it's almost like there's like a spell put on the books. Like they're incredibly, they're a passageway to falling asleep in a funny way. And I also love, as an adult, like looking at all the little details. And Margaret Wise Brown's writing is so simple and elegant and beautiful. Yeah, that was definitely, and as I got older, I was obsessed with Grimm's fairy tales. I felt like I was getting insight into a less than perfect world. They were very, I felt like I enjoyed how kind of morbid they were. And I always kept them by my bed because I just felt like it was this little precious book that was my own, that felt like it wasn't talking down to me, that it was, I loved it.
Have you read, and if you haven't, you have to go Google it now. Elizabeth Egan wrote this beautiful essay about Goodnight Moon in the New York Times. I think it was 2 weeks ago or so. It was so beautiful. And she like really took it apart and analyzed the book, but it was really about her own children growing up and coming at the book herself as her kids went off to college. And
oh, wow.
Yeah. And her reinterpretation of the woman in the chair, the character and her, I found it I haven't stopped thinking about it. It's so interesting.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Anyway, you should go Google and read that. That'll be your assignment for the day for me, aside from doing another book here together. Do the two of you have any advice for the many people out there who are always like, I want to write a children's book, or I have a story I think would be great. Should I do it? Should I not? Like, what makes it, will I get this published? All of that. What would you say? What's your advice?
I mean, I don't know. I think that a gratifying audience can also be the people one knows and one's friends. And, I mean, of course, it's a wonderful thing to be published and to be read by people you don't know on a larger scale. But for me, still, the most gratifying audience are my friends and the people that I love. And, sometimes I write something and I just send it to 3 or 4 friends, and I just want to express myself to them. And so, yes, like obviously try to get published, but there's, don't overlook the depth of like sharing yourself with the people that you love, and how, that's really important. It's not something to be sort of put down, I mean, yeah, that's what I would say. Yeah, there's a lot of richness in that.
Yeah. And I think I would kind of expand on what I was saying earlier about following your nose with your curiosity. And because, I feel like becoming a creative person is learning about, or it's like learning about when the spark comes. And so for me, that means that sometimes I go down to work and nothing is there. I can't, there's nothing going on in my head. I'm not inspired. And then all of a sudden I'm cooking or I'm driving and inspiration strikes. And I think that you kind of have to learn how this slippery creature of inspiration works, because you're not always going to have your greatest ideas when you summon them. Some of the greatest ideas come when you're not expecting them, and you have to be ready to write them down or paint them, even if it's just like in a little notebook, so you can try and remember that spark. So I have found that that's been the most helpful tool for me, is learning that I have no control over when inspiration is going to strike, but I'm very good at noticing when it comes. And when it comes, I'm like all ears. I'm like, okay, what are we going to do? What are we writing down? So yeah, I think that would be my biggest advice to people looking to get into writing or illustration is that.
Wonderful. Amazing. Well, thank you to both of you. I'm sorry we didn't get into more stuff. I wanted to talk about pure color and everything. But anyway, congratulations on your latest book. It's so beautiful. I am going to absolutely read it to my kids now that we've talked about it. I can give them even more backstory, Garden of Creatures. And sometimes I like to have them listen to the podcast with the author. So I'm like, okay, I'm reading you this book, but now listen. Here's what you meant to do. So anyway, congratulations. And thanks for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so much fun.
Good. I was hoping. All right. Have a great day.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.